Choosing what type of primary engineering controls or ventilated enclosure is right for a lab can sometimes be confusing. When working with chemicals, typically you would use a fume hood, and if your work involves biohazardous materials, you would use a biological safety cabinet. But what if your research involves both biohazardous agents and volatile chemicals? In this case, a Class II Type B2 100% exhausted BSC is often selected. Like all Class II BSCs, they provide three types of protection: personnel protection, product protection, and environmental protection. Class II Type B2 biosafety cabinets, unlike Type A2, do not recirculate any of the air within the cabinet. All air is exhausted. While exhausting all contaminated air makes intuitive sense, is a Type B2 BSC really needed for volatile chemical use? Are there other options that are still safe? The most common type of cabinet found in labs worldwide is the Class II Type A2 BSC. It has a front intake velocity of 100 feet per minute and partial recirculation with approximately 2/3 of the HEPA filtered air returned to the work surface. When you introduce a volatile chemical to the workspace, the recirculated air becomes contaminated. However, it has been previously recommended that minute amounts can be safely used within Class II BSCs when coupled with microbiological work. But what constitutes minute can be left up for interpretation. So why can't we simply assign a value for the maximum amount of chemical allowed? Remember, not all chemicals are created equal. For example, 250 milliliters of ethanol is very different from 250 milliliters of formaldehyde. The amount of any chemical used is going to depend on its harmful effects, evaporation rate, surface area of exposure, and the volume of air it's being diluted into. To prevent volatiles from being reintroduced to the lab, Type A2 BSCs must be equipped with a canopy connection and exhausted outdoors. You also need to be concerned about the exposure and explosion limits of the chemicals you're working with. Because air is recirculated within the cabinet, high amounts of chemical vapor or flammable vapors can accumulate beyond their exposure or explosion limits, posing a serious risk to you or your staff. Using a Type A2 recirculated BSC offers several other benefits when compared with a Type B2 100% exhausted BSC. Type A2 BSCs have a lower risk of failure as they are not reliant on the building's exhaust system like a B2. Type A2 BSCs have lower installation and operating costs as less heated and conditioned air is vented to the outside and are often easier to operate. So when using minute amounts of chemicals, a Type A2 cabinet may be the best choice. Minute specifically refers to the least amount of chemicals needed for the experiment currently being conducted. This amount must always be below the explosion and exposure limits for that chemical and stored in appropriate containers that are preferably capped and shatterproof. And remember, when making the decision between A2 and B2 BSCs, it's important to perform a full risk assessment before you begin any research. Working with a biosafety specialist will help you choose what BSC is and isn't an appropriate choice for your lab. For more information, watch the Baker webinar and read the paper entitled Volatile Chemicals in Class II Type A2 Recirculated BSCs, How Much is Safe? Lab Manager. When we talk science, we mean business. Brought to you by Baker.